You know what's wild? Right now, as you're watching this, there are buildings standing in Egypt that were already ancient when Julius Caesar visited them. Think about that for a second. Caesar walked through ruins that were older to him than Caesar is to us. I'm talking about Thebes, a city that dominated the world for longer than most civilizations have even existed. 1500 BC, the height of Egyptian power, and I've spent the last month using AI to reconstruct what this place actually looked like when it was alive. Not the stripped-down ruins tourists see today, but the full-color, bustling, absolutely overwhelming city that scared the hell out of every foreign diplomat who ever set foot in it. Let's go see what they saw. Okay, so you're arriving by boat. That's how everyone came to Thebes, down the Nile. And the first thing that hits you isn't even the buildings, it's the sound. 100,000 people packed into a city that's maybe 5 miles long. Market vendors shouting prices, donkeys braying, metalworkers hammering bronze, priests chanting from temples you can't even see yet. And then you round this bend in the river, and suddenly the entire eastern horizon is just columns. Hundreds of them rising out of the city like a stone forest. That's Karnak. And your brain can't quite process the scale because nothing in the ancient world is supposed to be this big. Let me put this in perspective. Karnak Temple covers 100 hectares. You could fit 10 football fields inside just the main precinct. But here's what makes it actually insane. They built it over 2,000 years. 2,000 years. That means when the last stones were being placed on top, the bottom stones were already ancient history. Pharaohs kept adding to it generation after generation, each one trying to outbuild their grandfather. It's like if every American president since George Washington had added a new wing to the White House, except instead of 200 years, it's 2,000. The whole complex is basically a timeline of Egyptian architecture carved in stone. Now you're walking into the great Hypostyle Hall, and this is where it gets genuinely overwhelming. 134 columns, and they're not just holding up a roof, they're making a statement. The central columns are 21 meters tall. That's a 7-story building, and they're carved to look like papyrus plants with the flowers opening at the top. The Egyptians believed the world began when the first land emerged from watery chaos and a lotus flower bloomed on it. So this hall, it's literally recreating the moment of creation. You're standing at the beginning of the world. Every single surface is covered in hieroglyphs, and I mean every surface. The columns, the ceiling, the architraves, the walls. It's information overload in stone. Here's what blows my mind though. Everything you're seeing, all these columns, all these walls, they were painted, not subtle earth tones, bright, in-your-face colors, deep blues made from ground lapis lazuli shipped in from Afghanistan, reds from ochre, yellows from orpiment, greens from malachite. The hieroglyphs were filled in with contrasting colors so they'd pop. The ceiling was dark blue with gold stars painted across it. Imagine walking into this hall when it was new, the incense smoke hanging in the air, lit by shafts of sunlight coming through the clerestory windows, the colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at, and priests moving between the columns in pure white linen, like ghosts in a painted dream. That's what Thebes was. We see bones. They lived in a body. Every morning, hours before sunrise, something happened in this temple that most Egyptians never witnessed. The high priest, and it had to be the high priest, no one else, would purify himself in the sacred lake. Total body shave, ritual bath, clean linen. Then he'd walk alone into the innermost sanctuary where the god lived. And by god, I mean a statue, maybe 18 inches tall, solid gold, sitting in a wooden shrine sealed with a clay plug. He'd break the seal, open the doors, and then he'd do something that sounds completely bizarre to us. He'd wash the statue's face, dress it in fresh linen, and present it with breakfast, bread, beer, roasted meat. The god had to eat, and this ritual happened every single day for over 1,000 years. Think about the faith that requires, the absolute certainty that if you stop, if you miss even one day, the cosmic order collapses. But let's be real for a second. Most people in Thebes weren't priests having mystical experiences in temples. They were working, grinding grain, making bricks, hauling water, and we actually know a ton about their lives because Egyptians were obsessive record keepers. There's this village called Deir el Medina, about 3 miles from here, where the tomb workers lived, and they left us everything. Shopping lists on broken pottery, letters complaining about their mother-in-law, receipts for donkey rentals. One guy wrote to his boss, "The scribe Amenact has not given us our grain rations. We are starving. Please send word to the vizier." This was written 3,300 years ago, and it could be an email from last Tuesday. These workers lived in tiny mud brick houses, 4 rooms if you were lucky, main living area, 2 storage rooms, kitchen in the back where your wife spent half the day making bread, because bread was the currency. You got paid in bread, beer, and oil. No money, no coins, just food. The houses had no windows on the ground floor because privacy mattered, and these neighborhoods were packed tight. You'd climb a ladder to the roof at night to sleep when it got too hot inside. Your neighbors were 2 feet away doing the same thing. You could hear everything: fights, kids crying, people making love, disease spreading, fire starting. These weren't the romantic ruins we see today. They were crowded, smelly, exhausting places to live, but people did live there for generations. And here's something that destroys the whole slaves-built Egypt myth. These workers went on strike multiple times. We have the records. Year 29 of Ramesses III, the tomb workers stopped working and marched to the temples demanding their back pay. They sat down in front of the administrative buildings and refused to move. One of them shouted, "We are hungry. 18 days have passed and we have received nothing." And you know what? It worked. The government negotiated, gave them their rations, because these weren't slaves. They were skilled artisans who knew their worth. Could slaves strike? Could slaves win? No. These were working-class people fighting for dignity, same as it ever was. Now, if you cross the Nile to the West Bank, you're entering a completely different world. The Egyptians called the East Bank the City of the Living and the West Bank the City of the Dead, because that's where the sun sets, where Ra dies every night before being reborn in the East. So that's where you bury your pharaoh, in the cliffs, hidden, protected, surrounded by magic spells and curses and prayers that are supposed to keep him safe for eternity. The Valley of the Kings, 63 tombs carved into the rock, and almost every single one was robbed in ancient times, because no matter how many curses you carve into the walls, gold is gold. Imagine you're Thutmose III. You've just conquered Syria, crushed rebellions in Nubia, expanded Egypt's borders further than any pharaoh before you. You're at the peak of your power, and you're spending a fortune carving your tomb. Not just a hole in the ground, a 100-meter corridor descending into the earth, with side chambers for your furniture, your chariots, your weapons, everything you'll need in the afterlife. The walls are covered in scenes from the Amdut, the book of what is in the underworld. 12 hours of night that your soul has to survive, demons to fight, gates to pass, riddles to answer, and at the end, if you make it, you're reborn with Ra at dawn. But you need the spells, you need the map, so you paint it on your walls in detail, because death is just the beginning. When Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, people lost their minds because it was intact. Well, mostly. It had been robbed twice in antiquity, but then the entrance got buried and forgotten. And what was inside? 5,000 artifacts. Gold coffins nested inside each other like Russian dolls. A solid gold death mask, chariots, beds, chairs, wine, food, board games, underwear, everything a king might need. And Tut was nobody. He died at 19 after a short, unremarkable reign. If this is what a minor pharaoh got, imagine what was in Ramesses II's tomb, or Seti I's, or Thutmose III's. Millions of dollars worth of gold gone, stolen 3,000 years ago by people who needed to feed their kids and didn't care about curses. Then there's these two, the Colossi of Memnon, 18 meters tall, 720 tons each, carved from single blocks of stone and dragged here from quarries hundreds of miles away. They sat at the entrance to Amenhotep III's mortuary temple, which was the biggest temple ever built in Egypt, bigger than Karnak, and it's gone, completely gone. Later pharaohs tore it down and reused the stones, but these statues, nobody could move them. Too heavy, too massive, so they just sat there for 3,400 years. Every army that invaded Egypt marched past them. Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Napoleon, British colonials, and they're still sitting, still staring east, waiting for the sunrise. If you want to understand Egyptian immortality, look at these. They outlasted everything. The temple, the kingdom, the religion, the language, everything, except the stone itself. Luxor Temple is different. It wasn't built for a god, it was built for kingship. This is where pharaohs came to transform from human to divine. Every year during the Opet Festival, the statue of Amun would travel from Karnak to Luxor along the Avenue of Sphinxes, a 2.5-mile road lined with over 1,000 Sphinx statues. The pharaoh would walk this route in front of the entire city, priests carrying the sacred boat, musicians, dancers, the smell of incense so thick you could barely breathe. And when he reached Luxor, the pharaoh would enter the innermost chamber alone. What happened in there, we don't fully know, but when he came out, he wasn't just a man anymore. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the son of Ra, a god in human form. The ceremony literally transformed his identity. Can you imagine the weight of that? Being told you're a god and having to live up to it? That Avenue of Sphinxes, by the way, wasn't just a pretty walkway. It was a symbolic journey. You started at Karnak, the realm of Amun, the hidden one, the king of gods, and you walked to Luxor, the place of transformation. During the festival, the entire route would be packed with people, tens of thousands of them, from all over Egypt and beyond. Syrian merchants, Nubian traders, Greek mercenaries, everyone came to watch the god travel. There'd be food stalls, beer tents, musicians on every corner, street performers, pickpockets working the crowds. It was half religious procession, half state propaganda, half street festival, and it happened every single year for centuries until Christianity came and shut it all down. But here's the thing. All of this, the temples, the tombs, the statues, the festivals, the entire civilization, none of it exists without the Nile. Every year, like clockwork, the river floods, mid-June to September. Water level rises 4 to 6 meters, spreads across the floodplain, deposits a layer of rich black silt, then recedes, and Egyptian farmers would just plant seeds in the wet mud and wait. No irrigation needed, no fertilizer. The Nile gave them 3 harvests a year: wheat, barley, flax, vegetables. It was the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world, and it required almost no work compared to farming anywhere else. That surplus is what built Egypt. While farmers in Mesopotamia were digging canals and fighting floods, Egyptian farmers were basically just waiting for free fertilizer to arrive on schedule. The Nile was their one true god. Everything else was just theater. So how do you build all this with copper tools and no pulleys? Very carefully, and with truly insane levels of organization. To move one of those 80-ton blocks from the quarry to the temple, you'd need a crew of 1,000 workers. They'd put the block on a wooden sledge, pour water on the sand in front of it. Wet sand reduces friction by like 50%. Then they'd pull, all together, in rhythm, probably singing to keep time, and they'd move it maybe 100 meters a day. It might take months to transport a single block. Then you've got to lift it into place without cranes, so you build ramps. Mud brick ramps that spiral up around the building as it grows, and when you're done, you dismantle the ramps. The logistics are honestly more impressive than the buildings themselves, coordinating thousands of workers, feeding them, housing them, replacing them when they get hurt or sick, keeping the project on track across multiple pharaohs' reigns.
That's the real miracle of Egypt, not the engineering, the management. And the only reason we know any of this is because of scribes. Being a scribe was the best job in ancient Egypt if you weren't royalty. You sat in the shade while everyone else sweated in the sun. You kept records, you wrote letters for people who couldn't write, you handled tax documents. You were basically untouchable because the entire system depended on you. But becoming a scribe meant years of school. You'd start as a kid, sitting cross-legged on the ground with a wooden board in your lap, copying hieroglyphs over and over until your hand cramped. 700 different symbols to memorize, and you had to master 3 different scripts: hieroglyphs for religious stuff, hieratic for business, and later demotic for everyday writing. Most Egyptian kids never learned to read, but if you did, if you made it through scribe school, you were set for life.
The stuff they wrote down is incredible. We've got medical texts describing surgeries, mathematical papyri showing they understood geometry well enough to calculate the volume of pyramids, love poems. One says, "My heart is not yet done with your love. See, you are in my heart like the seal in the ring, like the cloth around the body." That was written 3,000 years ago, and it's still beautiful. We've got letters from soldiers at frontier outposts complaining about the food, court records from divorce proceedings. A woman named Naunacht disinherited 4 of her 8 children because they didn't take care of her when she got old. She wrote, "They did nothing for me, so I will give them nothing." These aren't myths, these aren't legends, these are real people dealing with real problems, and their voices survived. Okay, let's talk about time, because this is where Egypt breaks your brain. Egyptian civilization lasted 3,000 years. 3,000. The Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BC. Cleopatra died in 30 BC. That means Cleopatra lived closer to us, closer to the iPhone, than she did to the building of the pyramids. By the time Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, the pyramids were already more ancient to him than the Roman Colosseum is to us. Ancient Egyptians were tourists in their own ancient sites. They'd visit temples that were already 1,000 years old and wonder how their ancestors built them. When you're in Egypt, you're not dealing with history, you're dealing with geologic time. Human time stretched so long, it stops making sense. So what happened? How does a civilization that lasted 3,000 years just stop? Honestly, it didn't stop all at once. It faded. Persia conquered it, then Alexander, then Rome. Each conqueror took a piece of what Egypt was. The religion slowly got replaced by Christianity, then Islam. The language shifted from Egyptian to Coptic to Arabic. The writing system was forgotten. By the Middle Ages, nobody could read hieroglyphs anymore. They were just pretty pictures carved on old buildings. The last person who could read them probably died sometime in the 4th or 5th century AD, and then it was just gone. A 3,000-year chain of knowledge snapped. It wasn't until Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822 that we could even begin to understand what any of this meant. We lost Egypt for 1,400 years. Today, you can visit Thebes. It's called Luxor now, and it's a tourist city. 4 million people visit every year. You can walk through the Hypostyle Hall at Karnak, but the colors are gone, stripped away by time and weather, and the hands of tourists who couldn't resist touching. You can go into the Valley of the Kings, but the treasures are in museums. The tombs are empty stone rooms with painted walls. The colossi of Memnon are cracked and weathered, one of them famously singing at dawn, because an earthquake created a crack that catches the morning wind. The Avenue of Sphinxes was buried for 2,000 years and only recently excavated. Most of it is still incomplete. What you see now are ruins, but they're ruins on a scale that still stops you cold. I think about what it would have been like to stand in the Hypostyle Hall when it was new. The colors, the incense, the chanting, the sense that you were standing in the house of God. And then I think about standing there now, in silence, with the paint gone and the roof collapsed and the sun beating down on stones that have stood for 3,500 years. There's something about the silence that hits harder than the spectacle would have, because the silence says this was real. People believed in this. People dedicated their entire lives to maintaining this.
and then they died, and their children died, and their children's children died, and eventually there was nobody left who remembered why any of it mattered. But the stones remember. The stones are still here, and that's the most Egyptian thing of all. They built for eternity, and they got it. Egypt didn't conquer the world like Rome. They didn't spread an empire across continents. They just sat there on their narrow strip of green, and they built. For 3,000 years they built. Temples that took centuries to complete, tombs that would never be seen by living eyes, statues that would outlast kingdoms. They built knowing they wouldn't live to see it finished. They built knowing their great-great-grandchildren wouldn't see it finished. They built for time itself, and they won. 3,500 years later, we're still talking about them, still studying them, still standing in front of what they made with our mouths open. If that's not immortality, I don't know what is. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which civilization you want me to reconstruct next.